Kicked out at 18, my brother and I found a hidden cellar behind the wall. What it became saved us. If you've ever felt like you were standing on a cliff with nowhere to go, this story is for you. We all have moments that define us, that split our lives into a before and an after. This was mine. And if you're new here, and stories about finding your way back from the edge mean something to you, maybe think about hitting that subscribe button. We talk about this stuff a lot here, and I read every comment. You're not just a number to me. You're part of this. The air in the administrative office of the St. Jude's Home for Boys tasted like stale paper and resignation. It was a taste I had known for 2 years, since the day my mom died and the world shrank to the size of a sterile, beige room. But on this day, my 18th birthday, the taste was different. It was laced with a new, metallic tang of finality. Mrs. Albright, a woman whose face was a permanent roadmap of weary disappointment, slid a single cardboard box across her desk. It wasn't even a big box. It was the kind you'd use for a pair of shoes. 18 years, and this was the sum total of my officially sanctioned possessions. "That's everything, Leo," she said, her voice as flat as the linoleum floor. "The county has fulfilled its obligation. You are now legally an adult." Legally an adult. The word sounded like a sentence, not a celebration. I looked inside the box. A few worn paperbacks, a framed photo of my mom with me and my younger brother Sam, squinting into the sun, and a bundle of letters from Sam that had been opened and read by staff before they ever reached me. I picked up the photo. Her smile was the only thing in the room that felt real. I had made her a promise, a silent one at her bedside, that I would always look after Sam. Now, here I was, being pushed out the door while he was still stuck inside, 3 years behind me, trapped in the same system that was spitting me out. "What about my brother?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Albright sighed, a slow deflation of institutional patience. "Samuel is a minor and a ward of the state. He will remain at St. Jude's. You can petition for visitation, but frankly, Leo, with no address, no income, the court isn't likely to see you as a stable influence." A stable influence. I was a ship being shoved off a dock with no rudder, no sail, and a gaping hole in my hull, and she was worried about my stability. The humor of it was so dry it felt like dust in my throat. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because arguing was a language they didn't speak here. Arguing was a sign of instability. I took the box. My knuckles were white where I gripped the worn cardboard. I walked out of her office, down the long, echoing hallway, polished with the scent of bleach and sadness, and pushed open the heavy front doors. The September air hit me like a physical blow. It was crisp and smelled of rain and freedom, and I hated it. Freedom felt like a lie. It felt like abandonment. I stood on the steps, a box of my life in my hands, with $47 in my pocket from a summer of mowing the facility's endless lawns. I had nowhere to go. Sam was still in there, probably watching from the second-floor window of the common room, his face pressed against the thick, shatterproof glass. I didn't look up. I couldn't bear to see him, to let him see the fear that was crawling up my spine. I started walking, just to be moving. The box grew heavier with each step, not with its physical weight, but with the weight of everything it represented. 2 years of grief, 2 years of being a number, 2 years of holding my breath. And now this terrifying, empty exhale. I ended up at the public library. Not because I wanted to read, but because it was warm and free and no one would ask me any questions. I found a carrel in the back, set my box down, and just sat there, the silence of the library a roaring in my ears. I pulled out my phone, a cheap prepaid model with a cracked screen, and saw a single, new voicemail. Unknown number. My heart gave a stupid little lurch of hope. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Mrs. Albright was calling to say there had been a clerical error. I pressed play. The voice was not Mrs. Albright's. It was a man's voice, calm and professional, with a low, steady cadence. This message is for Mr. Leo Vance. My name is Daniel Abibi. I am an attorney representing the estate of your late mother, Elena Vance. It has come to our attention that you have reached the age of majority today. There are certain legal matters that require your immediate attention. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. He left a number. My mother's estate. The words sounded foreign, like they belonged to someone else. My mom didn't have an estate. We had a tiny rented apartment, a mountain of medical bills, and a car that was more rust than metal. She was a cleaner, a waitress, a home health aide, whatever she could do to keep us fed. An estate was for rich people. This had to be a mistake, a scam. But it was the first thread, the only thread, to dangle in front of me all day. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. A receptionist put me through immediately. Mr. Vance, the same calm voice said. Thank you for returning my call. Happy birthday, by the way. I'm sorry for the circumstances. What circumstances? I asked, my voice hoarse. What is this about? Your mother, before she passed, made some arrangements. She owned a small property, freehold, a house and a few acres of land just outside a town called Mill Creek. Upon your 18th birthday, the deed was to be transferred solely into your name. That transfer was processed this morning. I couldn't breathe. A house. My mother owned a house? We had been evicted from 3 different apartments in 5 years. The idea of her owning anything, let alone a whole house, felt like a fantasy. That's not possible, I said. We didn't have anything. I understand your confusion, Mr. Abebe said, his tone patient. It was her family's original homestead. It's been vacant for some time, I believe. However, there is a complication. The property has accrued significant back taxes, roughly $3,400. The county has placed a lien on it. As the new owner, that debt is now yours. You have 90 days to pay the arrears, or the county will seize the property and auction it off. The thread of hope snapped. Of course, it wasn't a gift. It was a bill. A $3,000 anchor tied to a dream I didn't even know I had. I don't have that kind of money, I said, the words tasting like ash. I have $47. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a pitying pause, just a quiet, factual one. I see. Well, the deed and the keys are here at my office in the city. I can mail them to a P.O. box if you like. The property is yours, for 90 days at least. What you do with that time is up to you, Mr. Vance. He gave me his address. He told me the file number. He spoke with the detached sympathy of someone who delivered bad news for a living. After the call, I sat in the library, Carol, for a long time, staring at the photo of my mom. Her smile seemed different now. Was it a sad smile? A secret smile? Why would she leave me a house she never told me about? Why would she leave me a debt she had to have known I couldn't pay? It felt like a riddle. Or a trap. The library was closing. A security guard nudged my foot. I gathered my box and walked back out into the night. The rain had started, a cold, miserable drizzle. I found the awning of a closed-down bookstore and huddled underneath it, the cardboard box on my lap growing damp at the edges. A house, a debt, 90 days. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even a hope. But it was a direction. It was the only direction I had. The next morning, I used $20 of my $47 to buy a bus ticket to a city I'd never been to see a lawyer I didn't know, to pick up the keys to a house that would probably be taken away from me. It was the most insane, irresponsible thing I had ever done. It was also the first choice I had made for myself in 2 years. The bus ride was a long, rumbling journey from the concrete sprawl of the city into the darkening green of the countryside. I watched the landscape change through the grimy window, the strip malls and highways giving way to smaller towns, then to farms with long gravel driveways. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with more rain. I had managed to call Sam from a payphone before I left. I told him I had a plan, a place for us. I tried to sound confident, like the adult Mrs. Albright said I was. His voice was small on the other end of the line. "You'll come back for me, right, Leo?" "I promise," I said, and the word felt like a physical weight in my chest. Mr. Abebe's office was in a modest, older building, the kind with a real person at the front desk instead of a security scanner. He was a tall, slender man with kind eyes and a suit that looked a little too big for him. He shook my hand firmly. He didn't treat me like a scared kid. He treated me like a client. He laid a large manila envelope on his polished desk. "Here we are," he said. "The deed, a copy of the tax lien, and the keys." He slid it across the desk. I opened it. Inside was a folded, official-looking document, a sheaf of papers with red, "Past Due" stamps, and a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key on a simple ring. It was cold to the touch. "The house is about a 2-hour bus ride from here," he said, pointing to a location on a map. "It's rural. The property hasn't been occupied since your grandmother passed away, when your mother was still a teenager. I have to be honest with you, Mr. Vance. The file indicates it's likely in a state of serious disrepair. Most people in your position would walk away, or they'd try to sell the land to the development company that's been buying up property in that valley." "Development company?" "Blackwood Development. They've been trying to acquire the parcels around Mill Creek for a new resort project. They've made offers on your mother's property before. She always refused. They'll likely contact you once the ownership transfer is public record." He looked at me, his gaze direct. "It would be the fastest way to get some cash. It might be your only option." The easiest wrong. The thought came to me, unbidden. Sell my mother's home, a home she refused to sell, to pay for my own survival. I clutched the key in my pocket. "I need to see it first," I said. The final bus dropped me at a crossroads with a rusted sign that read, "Mill Creek, 2 miles." There was no bus stop, just a patch of gravel on the shoulder of a 2-lane road. The driver gave me a sympathetic look as I stepped off with my cardboard box. "House is about a mile up that dirt track," he said, pointing to a barely visible path disappearing into a thicket of trees. "Good luck, son." The walk was a journey into another time. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. The gravel path was overgrown, and branches clawed at my jacket. After about 15 minutes, the trees opened up, and I saw it. The house stood on a slight rise, silhouetted against the gray sky. Mr. Abebe's word, disrepair, was a kindness. The house was a skeleton. The porch sagged like a broken jaw. Paint peeled off the clapboard siding in long, curling strips. Several windows were boarded up, and one on the second floor was a dark, gaping hole. The yard was a jungle of weeds and thorny bushes. It didn't look abandoned, it looked defeated. My heart sank. This wasn't a home, it was a ruin. The $3,000 debt suddenly felt like $1 million. What was I thinking? I should have taken the lawyer's advice. I should be figuring out how to contact Blackwood Development. But then I looked at the front door. It was solid oak, dark and weathered, but it stood straight and true. And I had the key. I pushed through the waist-high weeds, my sneakers soaking through. The porch groaned under my weight, but it held. I stood before the door, took the heavy iron key from my pocket, and slid it into the lock. It was stiff, coated with years of rust and neglect. I had to put my whole body into it, gritting my teeth, my shoulder pressed against the door. With a final, agonized screech of metal on metal, the lock turned. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a wall of darkness that smelled of dust, decay, and trapped time. I stepped inside, leaving the gray light of the afternoon behind me. The air was cold and still. A thick blanket of dust covered everything, softening the edges of the furniture, which was all still there, draped in white sheets like a room full of ghosts. I pulled a sheet off a large armchair. The fabric underneath was faded but intact. I ran my hand over the armrest, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the dust. My mother had been here, my grandmother. This was their space. I spent the rest of the daylight hours walking through the house. It was a small, simple farmhouse. Downstairs was a living room with a huge stone fireplace, a kitchen with a massive cast-iron stove, and a small pantry. Upstairs were 2 small bedrooms. Every drawer I opened was empty. Every closet was bare. It was as if someone had systematically scrubbed the house of any personality, any history. There was no electricity, no running water. That night, I slept on the floor in the living room, wrapped in one of the dusty sheets, my cardboard box for a pillow. The house groaned and settled around me, and the wind howled through the broken window upstairs. I was cold, I was hungry, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. But for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't in a room that belonged to the state. I was in a room that belonged to me. For 90 days, at least. The next few days were a blur of grim reality. I spent my remaining $27 on a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a flashlight, and a box of trash bags at the small general store in Mill Creek. The man behind the counter, a grizzled old-timer named Earl, gave me a long look. "You're Elena's boy," he said, not as a question. "You got her eyes." He didn't say anything else, but when he handed me my change, he'd added a large bottle of water and a pack of matches to my bag without charging me for them. Back at the house, the sheer scale of the work was overwhelming. I started with the trash. I filled bag after bag with debris, fallen plaster, rotten floorboards, nests of unidentifiable creatures. I patched the broken window with a piece of plywood I found in the leaning woodshed out back. I swept, and the dust rose in choking clouds, dancing in the beams of my flashlight. It was hopeless, endless work. My hands were raw, my back ached, and my hope, which had been a tiny, flickering flame, was sputtering. I was just a kid, playing house in a tomb. It was on the 4th day that everything changed. I was in the pantry, a small, windowless room at the back of the kitchen. The shelves were bare, but the wall at the back felt wrong. It was covered in the same peeling, flowered wallpaper as the rest of the kitchen, but when I pushed against it, there was a slight give, a hollowness. My heart started to pound. I remembered stories my mom used to tell, fairy tales about hidden passages and secret rooms. They were just stories, weren't they? I ran my hands over the wall, pressing, searching. My fingers found a seam, a vertical line where the plaster underneath was cracked. I picked at it with my fingernails. A chunk of plaster came away, revealing dark wood beneath. It was a door that had been plastered and papered over. It had no handle, no hinges that I could see. I pushed, but it was solid. I threw my shoulder against it, again and again, grunting with effort and frustration. It was no use. I was about to give up, to write it off as just another piece of this broken-down house, when my foot slipped on a loose floorboard. I looked down. The board was shorter than the others. I pried at it with my fingers, and it came up easily. Underneath, nestled in the dark space, was a crowbar. It was a sign. It had to be. I took the crowbar, wedged the tip into the seam of the hidden door, and leaned back with all my weight. The wood groaned. Splinters flew. With a loud crack, the seal broke. I worked my way around the edges, prying and pulling, until the door, which was really more of a large, reinforced panel, swung inward with a rush of cool, dry air. The air didn't smell of dust and decay. It smelled of wax and earth and something else. Something sweet and floral. I shone my flashlight into the opening. It revealed a set of steep, narrow stone steps leading down into darkness. A cellar. But this was no damp, spider-filled hole in the ground. The air was clean. My light picked out smooth, stone walls and a floor made of packed earth. I took a deep breath, gripped the flashlight like a weapon, and descended the stairs. At the bottom, I swept the beam of light around the room. I gasped. It was a workshop. A long, sturdy wooden workbench ran along one wall, lined with tools that were clean and neatly organized. Along the other wall were shelves, and on those shelves were dozens and dozens of glass jars, their contents glowing like liquid gold in the flashlight beam. Honey. And stacked in the corner was beekeeping equipment, white suits, smokers, empty hive boxes. This wasn't a cellar, it was a secret. Her secret. My mother was terrified of bees. I remember that clearly. A picnic when I was 6. A bee landed on her soda can, and she had jumped up, her face pale, and pulled me and Sam away. She had always been afraid of them. Or so I thought. Here, in this hidden room, was evidence of a completely different person. A woman who worked with thousands of bees, who harvested their honey, who built this secret subterranean world. On the center of the workbench, there was a single object, a gray metal lockbox. It was a simple cash box, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. It wasn't even locked. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. I expected to find money. And there was money, but not in the way I thought. They were neat, banded stacks of 20s and 50s, a considerable amount, but that wasn't what caught my eye. On top of the money was a thick, sealed envelope. In my mother's familiar, looping handwriting, it just said, Leo. I sat down on the cold stone steps, the lockbox in my lap, and I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost knocked the wind out of me. It was one thing to lose her. It was another thing to realize I had never really known her at all. I took out the envelope. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were several folded pages, filled with her handwriting. And tucked within the pages was a cassette tape. I pulled out the pages and began to read. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that you have turned 18, and you are a man now. And second, that I am gone. I am so sorry, my love. I am sorry I had to leave you and Sam. Please know that not a day went by that my heart didn't break, knowing I couldn't watch you grow up. There is so much I need to explain, and not much time to do it. This house, this land, it was my inheritance, my anchor. After my own mother died, I couldn't bear to be here, so I ran. I ran to the city, I met your father, I had you. I thought I could build a new life. But anchors have a way of holding on. When your father left, and when I got sick, I knew I had to find a way to protect you and Sam. Not just to provide for you, but to give you something that couldn't be taken away. A few years ago, a company called Blackwood Development started trying to buy this land. They offered me money, more money than I had ever seen. But I knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to tear down this history, pave over this valley, and build a playground for the rich. This land fed my family for generations. It wasn't for sale. But they are not good people, Leo. They don't take no for an answer. They started to harass me. Legal threats, baseless complaints to social services. They tried to make my life so difficult that I would have no choice but to sell. They were part of the reason everything fell apart in the city. I was scared. I was sick. I knew I was running out of time. So I came up with a plan. I remembered my grandfather's bees. He kept hives here. He taught me about them, even though I was always afraid. He used to say that fear was just a lack of understanding. So I came back here, on weekends when you and Sam were with friends. I started learning. I read his old journals, I built this cellar, just like he taught my father to. A place to keep the honey cool and dry. I became a beekeeper, Leo. In secret. It turns out I wasn't afraid. I was strong. The honey was my secret weapon. People in town, the old families, they remembered my grandfather's honey. They bought it. Cash only, no records. Every dollar I made, I hid it here. This money in this box, it's for you. It's the product of bees and secrets and a mother's desperation. Now you have a choice. It's a terrible choice, and I am so sorry to put this burden on you. There should be enough money in this box to pay the back taxes and then some. It's enough to get the water and power turned back on, to buy food, to fix the roof. It's enough to start. It will be hard. This life is hard work. But it is a good life. It's a life you can build with your own 2 hands, on your own land. A life where you can bring Sam home. Or, there is another choice. There is probably enough money here for you and Sam to disappear. To go somewhere new, change your names, and start over, free from all this. Free from the developers, free from the past. You could take the money and run. No one would blame you. I wouldn't blame you. The choice is yours, my son. The choice between the harder right and the easier wrong. I couldn't sell, but I can't make that choice for you. Whatever you decide, know that I love you. Know that everything I did to give you this choice. To give you a chance at a life that is your own. I am so proud of the man you are becoming. Be good to your brother. Be good to yourself. All my love. Mom. I finished the letter, and the tears I had been holding back for 2 years finally came. I cried for my mother, for the secret life she had lived, for the strength she had hidden. I cried for her fear and her courage. I cried for myself, a lost boy holding a map I couldn't read. And I cried for Sam, alone in that sterile building, waiting for a promise I didn't know if I could keep. I sat there in the dark, cold cellar, surrounded by her legacy of honey and hard work, and I wept until I had no tears left. The lockbox felt impossibly heavy in my lap. It wasn't just money, it was a life, 2 lives, laid out before me. A life of struggle and ownership, or a life of flight and anonymity. My mother had given me her anchor. Now I had to decide if I was going to use it to hold my ground, or if I was going to cut the rope and drift away. I don't know how long I sat on those cold stone steps. An hour? 2? The flashlight beam grew weak, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The world had shrunk to this hidden room, and the impossible weight of the choice my mother had left me. My mind raced. I could see it so clearly. The easy path. Take the cash. It was more money than I'd ever imagined holding. I could buy a bus ticket to anywhere. I could find some cheap apartment in a city where no one knew my name. I could get a job, save up, and then figure out a way to get Sam. It was the sensible option, the logical one. It was survival. But my mother's words echoed in my head. This land fed my family for generations. I looked around the cellar, at the neat rows of jars, each one a testament to hours of patient, dangerous work. At the tools on the workbench, clean and ready, as if she had just stepped out for a moment. This wasn't just a cellar, it was a sanctuary. It was a fortress she had built against the world that was crushing her. And Blackwood Development, they weren't just some faceless company. They were the people who had hounded my mother, who had contributed to the stress that surely hastened her decline. Selling to them felt like spitting on her grave. It felt like letting them win. The harder right. What did that even look like? Staying here, in this wreck of a house, with no electricity, no water, no experience. Trying to become a beekeeper? A creature I was, thanks to my mother's feigned phobia, deeply wary of. It was insane. It was a path that led directly to failure. I'd lose the house to the county anyway, and I'd have wasted the only chance I had to escape. I felt a surge of anger. At her. How could she leave me this? This broken house, this impossible choice, this legacy of a fight I didn't ask for. It was too much. I was just a kid. I wasn't strong like her. I stood up, a sudden, violent urge to just run, to leave the box, the letter, the house, and just disappear into the woods. But my feet felt rooted to the packed earth floor. My gaze fell on the cassette tape I had set on the workbench. It was an old, cheap tape, the kind you could buy in a 3-pack at a drugstore. A small, handwritten label on it said, "For when you're scared." My hands were clumsy as I searched for something to play it on. Of course, there was nothing. No tape deck, no electricity. It was another one of her riddles. Frustrated, I started looking through the drawers of the workbench. They were filled with beekeeping miscellanea, queen excluders, spare frames, a small brush. In the back of the bottom drawer, my fingers brushed against something plastic. I pulled it out. It was an old Walkman, the chunky yellow sports model from the 90s. And next to it, 4 AA batteries still in their original packaging. My breath caught in my throat. She had thought of everything. I fumbled the batteries into the Walkman, my fingers slick with sweat. I popped the cassette in, the plastic door clicking shut with a satisfying snap. I put the cheap foam headphones over my ears, the foam disintegrating slightly as I did. I pressed play. There was a hiss, a click, and then her voice. Not the voice from my memories, weakened by illness. This was a strong, clear voice, filled with the ambient sounds of the outdoors. Birds chirping, the distant hum of insects. "Hey, Leo," she said, and her voice was so close, so real, it was like she was standing right next to me. "If you're listening to this, you've found my little secret. You've read the letter. And you're probably scared out of your mind. I know I would be. I wanted you to hear this. I wanted you to hear the sound of this place." The recording continued. She wasn't talking much. She was just being. There were the sounds of her walking through the tall grass, the sound of her working in the cellar, the clink of glass jars, and then a new sound, a low, powerful, all-encompassing hum. "That's them," she whispered on the tape. "That's the bees. Listen, they're not angry. They're just busy. They're working. Each one has a job. They work together. They build something, create something sweet out of nothing but sunlight and flowers. They protect their queen. They protect their home. They don't get scared. They just get to work." I closed my eyes. The sound of the bees filled my head. It wasn't a frightening sound. It was peaceful. It was the sound of life, of purpose. "I was wrong to teach you to be scared of them, Leo," her voice said, soft and full of regret. "I was trying to protect you from this place, from this fight, but I was really just protecting my own fear. What I should have taught you is that you don't have to be fearless. You just have to be brave for 5 minutes at a time, brave enough to take the next step, brave enough to fix the next board, brave enough to light the smoker. You do that 5 minutes at a time, and you can build a whole world." The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the hum of 1,000,000 tiny wings. I opened my eyes. I looked at the money in the box. I looked at the key to the house in my hand. I looked at the plans for a life I never knew I wanted. 5 minutes at a time. I could do that. My choice was made. I wasn't going to run. This was my land. This was my home. This was my fight now. I carefully placed the letter and the tape back in the lockbox. I took out $3,400 and put it in my pocket. The rest I left in the box, and I closed the lid. I walked up the stone steps and back into the dusty, dark kitchen. The house didn't look defeated anymore. It looked like it was waiting. The next morning, I walked the 2 miles into town. I walked into the county clerk's office, a small, stuffy room that smelled of old paper and coffee. A woman with a formidable beehive hairdo looked at me over her glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. "I'm here to pay the back taxes on the Vance property," I said. My voice didn't even shake. She blinked. She typed my name into her computer, her expression skeptical. Her eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be," she muttered. She printed out a form. I counted out the $3,400 bills onto the counter, the cash I had from the box. My mother's secret honey money. The woman counted it twice, then stamped the form with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Paid in full." She handed me a receipt. "The lien will be lifted by the end of the day," she said, her voice a little less icy. Welcome home, I guess. Walking out of that office, with the receipt in my pocket, was a better feeling than any bus ticket out of town could ever have been. I wasn't running from a debt anymore. I was investing in a future. I went to the general store. Earl was there, sweeping the front porch. "Morning," he grunted. "Morning," I said. "I need to get the power and water turned on at my place." He stopped sweeping and looked at me, a long, appraising look. He saw the receipt in my hand. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Figured you would," he said. "Your mother was stubborn too." That was the beginning. The work was brutal. I used the remaining money from the box, 5 minutes at a time, to buy what I needed: lumber to patch the roof, glass to fix the windows, a pump to get the well working again. Earl at the hardware store became my reluctant mentor. He'd sell me a bag of nails and throw in a 20-minute lecture on how to properly frame a wall. He never gave me anything for free, but he always made sure I had the right tool for the job and knew how not to kill myself using it. My days fell into a rhythm. Mornings, I worked on the house. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was honest. Every nail I hammered, every board I replaced, was a small victory. I was literally rebuilding my home with my own hands. In the afternoons, I went down into the cellar. I read my great-grandfather's journals. They were filled with notes on beekeeping, on the seasons, on the nectar flows of the local wildflowers. It was a language I didn't understand, but I was determined to learn. The first time I put on one of the white bee suits, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely zip it up. The suit was old and smelled of beeswax and smoke. I walked out to the hives, which were tucked away in a small clearing behind the house. They were overgrown, but a few of them were still active. I could hear the hum, the same hum from my mother's tape. I lit the smoker, the way the journal described, the smoke smelling sweet and strange. My heart was pounding in my chest. Brave for 5 minutes. I puffed some smoke into the entrance of the hive, and I lifted the lid. Inside was a world of chaos and order. Tens of thousands of bees, crawling over each other, a single, unified organism. I was terrified, but I just stood there, breathing. I watched them. They weren't attacking me, they were just busy. I found the queen, a larger bee with a spot of paint on her back, just like the journal said. I checked the frames for honey. I did everything the book told me to do. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, I put the lid back on. I walked back to the house and took off the suit. I was drenched in sweat, but I was grinning. I had done it. Slowly, the house started to feel less like a ruin and more like a home. I got a letter from Blackwood Development. It was printed on thick, expensive paper, a formal offer to buy the property for a sum of money that made my head spin. It was the easy way out, presented on a silver platter. I wrote back on a single sheet of notebook paper. No thank you. A week later, I got another letter, this one from their legal department, alluding to zoning disputes and access rights. The harassment my mother had written about. But I wasn't scared. I was angry. And I had my mother's secret weapon. I found her old files in the cellar, documenting every phone call, every threat. I took them to Mr. Ababy. He read them, his expression grim. She built a strong case, he said. Let them push. We'll be ready. My biggest project, my most important one, was Sam. I called him every week. I sent him letters, not just with words, but with photos. A photo of the repaired porch, a photo of me in the bee suit, a photo of the first jar of honey I harvested myself. I filed the paperwork for visitation and then for guardianship. Mrs. Albright's words about my instability echoed in my head. But now, I had an address. I had a deed with my name on it, free and clear. I had a business, however small. I was building a stable influence, one 2x4 at a time. The hearing was in a small, drab courtroom. A judge, a social worker, and me. I wore my only clean shirt. I didn't have a lawyer I could afford for this. I just had the truth. I spoke about my mother. I spoke about the house, the bees, the work. I showed him the photos. I told him about the promise I had made. The judge listened patiently. He asked me questions. What would Sam do for school? How would I support him? I had answers. I had researched the local school district. I had a business plan scribbled on a legal pad for Vance Family Honey. When I finished, the room was silent. Mr. Vance, the judge said, looking at me over his glasses, you have been through more than most people experience in a lifetime. By all accounts, you should be a statistic. Instead, you've taken a ruin and you've started to build a home. You've taken a legacy of debt and turned it into a legacy of purpose. He looked down at the file, then back at me. The state's interest is in the well-being of the minor, and it is my belief that Samuel's best chance at a stable, loving home is with you. He banged his gavel. Petition for guardianship granted. I walked out of that courtroom and felt the sun on my face. 2 weeks later, I drove Earl's borrowed, beat-up pickup truck back to St. Jude's. I didn't walk in the front door this time. I waited outside, and then the door opened, and Sam came out, carrying a single cardboard box, just like I had. He looked smaller than I remembered. He stopped on the top step, his eyes wide. I opened my arms, and he ran into them. He was crying. I was crying. You came back, he whispered into my shoulder. I promised, didn't I? I said. We drove home to Mill Creek, to our house. I showed him his room, the one I had fixed up first. I showed him the cellar, our mother's secret. I showed him the bees. He was scared at first, just like I was. But then I told him what Mom had said on the tape, that you just have to be brave for 5 minutes at a time. The next day, he helped me paint the hives. The years that followed weren't easy. There were struggles. There were times when money was tight, when a storm knocked down a tree on the roof, when a whole hive died over a long winter. Blackwood development continued to be a thorn in our side, but with Mr. Abibi's help, we held them off. We weren't just a boy and his brother. We were a family, with roots in the land and a lawyer on retainer. But mostly, there was good. There was the rhythm of the seasons, the hard work of the spring, the sweet harvest of the late summer, the quiet mending of the winter. Sam turned out to be a natural with the bees. He was patient and calm in a way I never was. He talked to them. Vance Family Honey grew. We started selling at the local farmer's market. People remembered my grandfather's honey, and they tasted my mother's legacy in ours. We weren't rich. We never would be. But we were building something. Together. Sometimes at dusk, I'll sit on the front porch, which no longer sags, and look out over the valley. The house is warm behind me, filled with the smell of dinner and the sound of Sam's terrible music. I'll see the lights of our neighbors, other small farms and homes, a community that has embraced us. And I think about the word inheritance. I used to think it meant money or property. But I was wrong. My mother didn't leave me a house. She left me a choice. She left me a blueprint for how to be strong. She left me a reason to fight. The cellar wasn't just a place to hide things. It was a foundation. It held the truth of who she was, and it became the place where we discovered who we were meant to be. It didn't just save us from the street. It saved us from being lost. This journey taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build. It's a choice you make every day to show up, to do the work, to be brave for 5 minutes at a time. Maybe your hidden cellar isn't behind a wall in a pantry. Maybe it's a talent you've forgotten you have. Maybe it's a promise you made to yourself a long time ago. Maybe it's a difficult truth you need to face. Whatever it is, I hope you find the courage to open that door. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your own hidden strength, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and become part of this community. And please, share your own story in the comments below. I promise I'll read it. Because we all have a story about finding our way home, and every single one of them matters.